The Nexus station had all the charm of a bureaucratic nightmare wrapped in chrome plating and artificial gravity. Floating serenely in the Andromeda Junction, like a metallic tumour on the face of civilized space, it processed approximately 47,000 different forms of interspecies commerce daily, which, according to the beings who ran it, was exactly 46,999 more transactions than any single biological entity should reasonably expect to comprehend. Evelyn Brightwater had long since stopped trying to comprehend anything about galactic commerce. Her job description read Xenobiological Waste Management Specialist, which was the kind of title that sounded impressive, until you realised it meant she spent her days cleaning up after creatures whose biological functions defied both physics and basic decency. The galaxy's polite term for pest control apparently required 17 syllables and a minor in quantum biology. On this particularly mundane cycle, she found herself trudging through waste disposal sector 7 Alpha with her standard issue bioscanner chirping complaints about atmospheric contamination. The sector smelled like a combination of ozone, industrial lubricant, and something that might have been either exotic cuisine or decomposing matter. With alien biology, the distinction was often academic. "Another thrilling day in paradise," she muttered, stepping over a puddle of what her scanner cheerfully identified as unknown organic compounds. Potentially hazardous. Have a nice day. The exclamation point was apparently mandatory in all Nexus station safety warnings, as if enthusiasm could somehow make industrial accidents more palatable. The sound that stopped her wasn't mechanical. In a place where every surface hummed, buzzed, or emitted regulatory compliance tones, the soft whimpering stood out like a human lullaby at a Vextharan funeral march. She followed the sound past a row of waste processing units, their surfaces glowing with the kind of cheerful green that usually meant radiation hazard in 17 different languages. Behind processing unit 77 Alpha 9, she found them. 3 small furry forms huddled against the unit's waste heat outlet, clearly seeking whatever warmth they could find in the sector's artificially regulated atmosphere. They were unmistakably Chirac cubs, their distinctive dark fur marked with the pale chest patches that made their species look perpetually surprised. Each one was roughly the size of a 6-month-old human infant, with the kind of large, dark eyes that evolution had specifically designed to make other creatures want to feed them immediately. They were also clearly dying. "Well, isn't this just perfect?" Evelyn said, kneeling beside the cubs. Her scanner immediately began cataloguing their vital signs with a detached efficiency that made galactic medical technology simultaneously impressive and infuriating. Core temperature dropping, dehydration levels critical, muscle mass indicating prolonged malnourishment. Prognosis: terminal without immediate intervention. The cubs looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too large for their small faces, making soft, chittering sounds that a universal translator unhelpfully identified as distress vocalizations species Chirac. Emotional context, abandonment, fear, suggested response, immediate parental substitute required. Sometimes she really hated her equipment's honesty. "Right," she said, standing up and activating her comm unit. "This is Brightwater in Sector 7 Alpha. I've got 3 Chirac cubs here, abandoned and in critical condition, requesting immediate medical support and emergency housing protocols." The response came with the kind of bureaucratic speed that made glacial movement seem hasty. Administrator Hex Nine's voice buzzed through her comm with the metallic undertones that all Vextharan vocal cord produced. Specialist Brightwater, please clarify the nature of your request. Are you reporting a contamination incident? I'm reporting 3 dying baby animals, Hex 9. They need help. Ah. There was a pause filled with the sound of mandibles clicking, which Evelyn had learned was the Vextharan equivalent of disapproving tongue clicking. You are referring to biological waste disposal matter. Please follow standard protocols for organic contamination. Immediate incineration is recommended to prevent station-wide health hazards. Evelyn looked down at the cubs, who had begun crawling toward her with the kind of determination that only very young creatures possessed when seeking comfort. One of them, slightly larger than the others, managed to reach her boot and began trying to climb her leg with tiny claws that couldn't have harmed a flower petal. These aren't waste, Hex 9. These are children. Specialist Brightwater, your emotional attachment to biological specimens is noted in your file. However, station regulations clearly state that abandoned organic matter in waste disposal sectors must be processed according to Sanitation Code 447B. There are no exceptions for personal sentiment. The largest cub had made it halfway up her shin, and was looking at her with eyes that seemed to hold a kind of ancient sadness that shouldn't exist in something so young. Its siblings huddled closer to her other leg, seeking warmth from her body heat. Evelyn made a decision that would have made her human supervisors proud, and every galactic administrator in the sector file formal complaints. She unzipped her thermal regulation jacket, the one designed to keep human body temperature stable in the station's variable atmospheric conditions, and gently scooped up all 3 cubs. They fit perfectly against her chest, their small bodies trembling with cold and exhaustion. The moment they felt her warmth, they burrowed deeper into the jacket's insulation, making soft sounds of relief that needed no translation. Specialist Brightwater, Hex 9's voice carried the kind of edge that suggested multiple forms were being filled out in triplicate. You are interfering with standard station protocols. Return the biological specimens to their original location immediately. No. The word hung in the recycled air between them like a challenge. Through her comm, she could hear the distinctive sound of Vextharan administrative panic, the rapid clicking of mandibles accompanied by the frantic tapping of multiple appendages on processing keyboards. I beg your pardon. I said no, Hex 9. These cubs are under my protection now. If you want them, you'll have to go through me. Specialist Brightwater, you're in violation of station's codes 447-B, 223-C, and 891-A regarding unauthorized biological acquisition. I am dispatching Enforcement Unit Praxis to retrieve the contaminated specimens immediately. Evelyn looked down at the cubs, who had stopped shivering for the first time since she'd found them. The largest one had fallen asleep against her chest, its tiny paws gripping the fabric of her jacket with the desperation of something that had finally found safety. Good luck with that, she said, and cut the comm connection. As she made her way toward Medical Bay 7, the cubs tucked securely inside her jacket, Evelyn reflected on the peculiar nature of galactic civilization. 47 different species had come together to build the most advanced trading station in 3 galaxy clusters, complete with technology that could manipulate matter at the molecular level and communication systems that could translate the thoughts of crystalline entities into interpretive dance. But somehow, none of them had figured out that babies shouldn't be thrown away with the garbage. "Don't worry, little ones," she whispered to the cubs as they walked through corridors filled with beings who possessed the collective wisdom of 1,000 worlds. "Auntie Evelyn's got you now." Behind them, alarms began to sound, and the distinctive, heavy footsteps of Enforcement Unit Praxis echoed through the station's corridors. The cubs stirred at the noise, but remained nestled against her warmth, trusting in the kind of protection that apparently only the galaxy's most primitive species still understood. The chase was about to begin. Medical Bay 7 had been designed by committee, which explained why it looked like someone had asked 17 different species to describe healing space, and then tried to accommodate everyone's suggestions simultaneously. The result was a room that hummed with 8 different frequencies, glowed in colours that technically didn't exist on most worlds, and smelled like sanitizer mixed with what the Nexus Station's environmental systems optimistically called universal comfort aromatics. Evelyn had chosen it specifically because it was the one place on the station where her actions could be technically classified as medical intervention rather than theft of station property. The fact that it also happened to have the best security locks in the civilian section was purely coincidental, mostly. The cubs had awakened during the journey, their large eyes taking in their new surroundings with a kind of cautious curiosity that very young creatures displayed when they weren't sure whether they were safe or just postponing the inevitable. The largest one, whom Evelyn had mentally dubbed Big Brother, kept looking up at her face as if trying to memorize her features. His 2 smaller siblings, clearly twins by their identical markings, huddled against his sides in a formation that spoke of learned survival tactics. "Well, aren't you 3 just a picture of galactic efficiency?" she muttered, settling them onto the medical bay's primary examination table. Her jacket, now cubs-free but still warm with their body heat, hung over her arm like evidence of her supposed crimes. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." The medical scanner's report was depressingly thorough. Malnutrition, dehydration, exposure trauma, and what the system delicately termed psychological distress indicators consistent with parental abandonment. In other words, 3 baby bears who'd been dumped like garbage and left to die because some bureaucrat somewhere had decided they weren't worth the paperwork. Outside the medical bay, she could hear the distinctive metallic footsteps that announced the arrival of Enforcement Unit Praxis. The hegemony's military caste had been bred for efficiency rather than creativity, which meant they approached every problem with the same solution: overwhelming force applied with mechanical precision. They were very good at their jobs, assuming their jobs never required thinking outside the parameters of their programming. "Specialist Brightwater," came the amplified voice through the door's communication grid. "You are ordered to surrender the contaminated biological specimens immediately. Failure to comply will result in forcible entry and potential criminal charges." Evelyn activated the medical bay's quarantine protocols, which sealed the room with the kind of locks that required either administrative override or a small nuclear device to breach. She then turned on the room's medical emergency beacon, which would theoretically summon help from anyone with medical training and a conscience. On Nexus Station, that was a distressingly short list. "Sorry, can't hear you over the sound of actual medical care being performed," she called back, settling into the room's primary chair and pulling the cubs back into her lap. They came willingly, having apparently decided that the warm human was infinitely preferable to the cold, hostile universe outside. The pounding on the door began immediately, accompanied by what sounded like several different species arguing about proper breach protocols. Through the medical bay's monitoring system, she could see Enforcement Unit Praxis conferring with Administrator Hex 9, whose mandibles were clicking with the rapid-fire intensity that indicated serious bureaucratic distress. "This is highly irregular," Hex 9's voice carried through the door's communication system with the kind of outrage typically reserved for accounting discrepancies. "Medical quarantine protocols are designed for disease containment, not emotional attachment disorders." Emotional attachment disorders. Evelyn looked down at the cubs, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion conducted entirely in soft, chittering sounds. "These little guys are the healthiest things on this station. Everything else here is suffering from a terminal case of bureaucratic heartlessness." The middle sibling, smaller than Big Brother but braver than his twin, had begun exploring the fascinating complexity of Evelyn's fingers, apparently concluding that human digits were the most interesting toys in known space. His siblings watched this investigation with the kind of serious attention that suggested they were taking notes for future reference. A new voice joined the corridor conversation, this one carrying the distinctive warm tones that indicated another human had arrived. "What exactly is going on here?" "Dr. Copperfield," Evelyn called out, recognizing the voice of the station's chief medical officer. "Perfect timing. I've got 3 patients in here who need immediate care, and apparently that's a violation of 17 different station codes." "Merrin, is that you in there?" Dr. Merrin Copperfield's voice carried the kind of professional calm that came from years of dealing with medical emergencies in space. "What's your status?" 3 Chirac cubs, abandoned in the waste disposal sector, suffering from exposure and malnutrition. I've got them stabilized, but they need proper medical attention." There was a pause, followed by the sound of heated discussion in the corridor. When Dr. Copperfield spoke again, her voice carried the edge that medical professionals developed when dealing with administrative stupidity. "Administrator Hex 9, these are medical patients. I'm overriding your disposal order under Medical Emergency Protocol 7. "Dr. Copperfield." Hex 9's mandibles were now clicking so rapidly they sounded like an old-fashioned typewriter. "These specimens were found in a waste disposal area. They are contaminated biological matter, not medical patients." "Are they alive?" "Well, yes, but..." "Are they suffering from treatable medical conditions?" "The scans indicate then they're patients. Evelyn, I'm authorizing full medical support. Keep those cubs comfortable while I deal with this bureaucratic nightmare." The cubs, oblivious to the political drama unfolding around them, had discovered that human clothing contained pockets, and pockets were apparently the most fascinating invention in galactic history. Big Brother had managed to wedge himself partially into Evelyn's jacket pocket, while his siblings investigated the complex ecosystem of her equipment belt. Another set of footsteps approached, these ones heavier and more deliberate. "What's all this commotion about?" The voice carried the gravelly tone and confident authority that marks someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Chief Engineer Wells," Dr. Copperfield's voice held obvious relief. "We have a situation. Bastian Wells was the kind of engineer who could make a broken hyperdrive engine purr like a contented cat and convince a malfunctioning artificial intelligence to apologise for its attitude problems. He was also, Evelyn knew, the sort of human who took a very dim view of anyone who mistreated anything smaller than themselves. "Let me see if I understand this correctly." His voice carried the dangerous calm that preceded either brilliant solutions or spectacular explosions. "We've got 3 sick baby animals, a medical professional offering to treat them, and a bunch of bureaucrats arguing about paperwork. The biological specimens are station property," Hex 9 began, "and regulations clearly state—" "Chief Wells," Evelyn called through the door, "hypothetically speaking, if someone were to accidentally trigger a false contamination alert in this sector, how long would it take to resolve?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of Bastian Wells' laughter. "Oh, hypothetically? Well, contamination protocols would require evacuating this entire section for at least 72 hours, while environmental systems ran full decontamination cycles. Terrible inconvenience for everyone involved." "That would be highly disruptive to station operations," Hex 9 protested. "Not nearly as disruptive as the publicity nightmare when the Galactic News Network find out that Nexus Station throws babies in the garbage," Dr. Copperfield added helpfully. The Cubs had apparently reached a consensus about human pockets, concluding that they were insufficient for proper nesting requirements. They had instead arranged themselves in a neat pile on Evelyn's lap, with Big Brother serving as a furry foundation, while his siblings used him as a combination pillow and security blanket. The soft sounds of their breathing filled the medical bay with the kind of peace that seemed impossible in the midst of bureaucratic chaos. Through the communication system, she could hear increasingly heated discussions about proper protocols, medical authority, chain of command, and something called biological asset management guidelines that sounded like it had been written by someone who had never seen an actual living creature. "You know," Evelyn said to the Cubs, who responded by opening sleepy eyes to look at her with expressions of absolute trust, "your species is supposed to grow up to be fearsome warriors. Right now, you're about as threatening as a basket of warm dinner rolls." Big Brother made a sound that might have been agreement, or possibly a request for actual dinner rolls. His siblings stirred at the sound, apparently concluding that if their big brother was talking, it was time to be awake and alert for potential snacks. Outside, the argument continued, with various voices joining the discussion as words spread through the station's human population. Engineers, medical staff, maintenance workers, and what sounded like at least 3 different restaurant managers were now apparently involved in the great Cubs debate of cycle 7751. "This is getting ridiculous." Administrator Hex 9's voice had risen to the pitch that indicated serious mandible strain. "I am calling for backup from Station Security Central Command." "Good luck with that," came Chief Wells' amused reply. "Central Command's been dealing with a mysterious power fluctuation in their main communication array for the last 20 minutes. Strangest thing, almost like someone with intimate knowledge of station systems wanted to buy us some time to sort this out reasonably." Evelyn smiled, settling back in her chair as the Cubs arranged themselves more comfortably in her lap. Sometimes the best thing about humans wasn't their technology or their diplomatic skills or their impressive ability to survive in hostile environments. Sometimes it was their simple, stubborn refusal to let bureaucracy win. The arrival of Captain Orth Prime was announced by the sudden silence that fell over the corridor argument, followed by the distinctive sound of multiple species simultaneously attempting to look respectful while maintaining their positions. The Saurian Collective's military representatives had that effect on most civilized beings, not because they were particularly aggressive, but because they possessed the kind of casual competence that suggested they could dismantle a small moon if it inconvenienced them. "What?" came the captain's voice through a communication grid, carrying the gravelly authority of someone who had personally negotiated peace treaties by winning arm wrestling contests. "Is this circus about?" Administrator Hex 9's mandibles clicked with the rapid-fire intensity of someone trying to summarize a bureaucratic nightmare for military consumption. "Captain, we have a human refusing to surrender contaminated biological specimens. She has barricaded herself in Medical Bay 7 and is interfering with proper waste disposal protocols." "Contaminated biological specimens," Orth Prime repeated, his tone suggesting that he was tasting the words and finding them unpalatable. "Show me." The Medical Bay's external scanner activated, projecting a holographic display of the room's interior. Evelyn looked up from where she sat with the 3 cubs arranged peacefully in her lap. Big Brother now sound asleep, while his siblings engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about the relative merits of different fingers as chew toys. Captain Orth Prime's reaction was immediate and completely unexpected. The sound that emerged from his vocal cords was something between a roar of recognition and a cry of anguish that needed no translation across species barriers. "Honor Singer Thron's offspring," he breathed, his massive frame suddenly very still. "They live." The corridor fell silent except for the soft chittering of the cubs, who had looked up at the sound of their father's name with the kind of alert attention that suggested genetic memory ran deeper than conscious thought. "You knew their father?" Evelyn asked through the communication system. "Thron saved my ship during the Vorten conflict." Orth Prime's voice carried the weight of debts that transcended species boundaries. "He died covering our retreat. I swore by the ancient codes that his bloodline would know honor." Administrator Hex 9's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, which was generally a sign of either deep thought or complete system failure. "Captain, these specimens were abandoned in waste disposal. There are regulations." "There are honor debts," Orth Prime interrupted, "that supersede your paperwork." The Galactic Refugee Commission's emergency response time was impressive, considering they operated on a bureaucratic scale that made geological time seem hasty. Within 6 hours of Dr. Copperfield's formal challenge to Station Code 447-B, a full diplomatic team had arrived via priority transport, armed with the kind of legal documentation that could restructure a solar system's government or make a small asteroid apologize for existing. Commissioner Yef Naral, a being whose species had evolved from what could charitably be described as organized coral, approached the situation with the methodical precision that had made the Commission the galaxy's premier authority on beings who found themselves inconveniently displaced from their natural habitats. "Let me understand the situation." Commissioner Yef Narrow's voice resonated with harmonics that suggested deep thought and infinite patience. 3 orphaned cubs of a species, classified as galactic protected status, were discovered in a waste disposal facility, and the station's response was immediate incineration rather than notification of proper authorities. Administrator Hex 9's mandibles had developed a nervous twitch that made soft clicking sounds like a broken metronome. The specimens were found in an unauthorized location. Regulations clearly state... Regulations! Captain Orth Prime interrupted, his massive frame blocking most of the corridor's lighting. Do not supersede the ancient codes of honour. These cubs are under my protection as blood debt to their father, and under mine as patients requiring medical care, Dr. Copperfield added, with the tone medical professionals used when explaining basic concepts to particularly dense administrators. And under mine, Chief Wells chimed in cheerfully, because I have just finished updating the station's environmental systems to classify abandoned younglings as critical biological assets rather than waste. Amazing what you can accomplish with properly motivated programming. Inside the medical bay, Evelyn watched this diplomatic dance while the cubs engaged in their own important negotiations about proper sleeping arrangements. Big Brother had claimed her left arm as his personal territory, while the twins had established a democratic timeshare agreement over her right hand for optimal finger-chewing access. Commissioner Yef Naral's decision, when it came, carried the weight of galactic law and cosmic justice rolled into one harmonically complex pronouncement. Station Administrator Hex 9, you are hereby ordered to update Waste Disposal Protocol 447B to include mandatory biological scans for abandoned life forms. Specialist Brightwater, you are appointed as official guardian of these cubs under emergency refugee protection status. Captain Orth Prime, your honour debt is acknowledged and recorded. The cubs, apparently sensing that the adults had finally reached an acceptable conclusion, celebrated by falling asleep in a pile of fur and contentment that made even Commissioner Yef Naral's coral-like features soften with something resembling maternal approval. 6 months later, Nexus Station had gained an unexpected reputation as the galaxy's premier crisis nursery for abandoned younglings. Evelyn's thermal regulation jacket, now officially catalogued as Emergency Diplomatic Instrument 7751-A, hung in a frame outside Medical Bay 7 alongside a small plaque that read, "The Treaty Coat, proof that sometimes the best diplomacy is just giving a damn." The cubs, now healthy enough to be genuinely threatening to furniture and small equipment, had grown into their promise as future warriors, while maintaining their conviction that the best place in the universe was wherever Evelyn happened to be sitting. Big Brother had appointed himself her personal bodyguard, a job he took seriously despite being roughly the size of a medium dog. His siblings served as reconnaissance specialists, which mainly involved finding new and creative ways to get into trouble. When the next emergency call came in, 3 abandoned crystalline hatchlings found in Loading Bay 12, Evelyn simply sighed, grabbed her backup jacket, and headed out to collect another set of biological specimens that someone had mistaken for garbage. After all, somebody had to teach the galaxy's most advanced civilizations the basics of not throwing babies away with the trash. The irony wasn't lost on her that humans, supposedly the galaxy's newest and most primitive species, had somehow become the go-to experts on something as basic as don't abandon children. Every major station in 3 sectors now had at least one human on their emergency response team, not because of their advanced technology or superior intellects, but because they possessed the apparently revolutionary concept that small, helpless creatures deserved protection rather than disposal. Big Brother chose that moment to demonstrate his growing strength by attempting to carry Evelyn's equipment bag, which was roughly twice his size, and contained enough specialised xenobiology gear to outfit a small research station. His determination was admirable. His execution resulted in him getting tangled in the straps and tumbling across the floor in a ball of fur and indignation. Yeah, Evelyn said, watching him struggle with dignity intact and tail held high. You're definitely going to be a fearsome warrior someday, right after you figure out how bags work. The twins, observing their brother's tactical error, exchanged what could only be described as knowing looks before proceeding to demonstrate the proper technique for equipment bag investigation. Teamwork, patience, and strategic application of adorable eyes until the human did all the actual work for them.